Welcome to the 29th Cinelit podcast. Today, we are continuing our look at the giant monsters of filmland. We've tackled Godzilla, we've tackled King Kong, and this week we are looking at a giant of another kind. A giant in the world of stop-motion animation, and a figure that does indeed loom large over monster cinema. The incomparable Ray Harryhausen. I am your host, Adam Marsh, and I am joined as ever by Cinelit's resident expert, Daryl Buxton. How are you, Daryl?
Great, thanks, Adam. Love Ray's films and looking forward to talking about them.
Yeah, Ray Harryhausen, it's just part of the national fabric of Bank Holiday Mondays, fathers showing their sons these films throughout history, the last 50 years or so. He's been a major part of certainly British TV and British film culture in this country, more so than probably in America, I think.
I would think so, yeah. I mean, he's big in the States, but largely among, as we'll go on to talk about, largely among people of a slightly older generation who maybe saw his films growing up in the 50s and then a lot of them went on to have careers in film themselves and have bought Ray's techniques and embellished Ray's techniques in the things they've done. And as we'll talk about, they've all won about 10 Oscars each, and Ray didn't. Ray was working at a time when you didn't get Oscars for that kind of thing. So there you go.
He doesn't need Oscars. His work stands way above Oscars.
Sure. So I think you've got that sort of 50s generation that sort of grew up on his early films. But yeah, as you say, later on, by the late 60s and through the 70s. They were the films that dads were taking their kids to, and on TV every Christmas or every Easter or whatever, it's they are just part of the furniture.
My dad doesn't get excited and giddy about cinema much, really, but he's a huge Jason the Argonauts fan, and we had Gary Raymond at Quad a couple of years ago for a UFO convention, and I've not seen him as a live. He's like, "Oh, did you tell him that Jason the Argonauts is your dad's favorite film?" I'm like, "I don't think he cares, Dad." He was so excited about that.
Yeah, Let me throw in a quote there, Adam, because I just mentioned that Ray had not won an Oscar, and whereas a lot of the people he influenced have won a wheelbarrow full, but Ray was given an honorary Oscar in 1992, and it was presented by his old mate Ray Bradbury, who we'll talk about their friendship, I'm sure. And Ray Bradbury called Ray Harryhausen up on stage, presented the award, gave a little speech about him. Ray Harryhausen typically didn't say very much, but then he shook hands with Tom Hanks, who was comparing the evening. If you watch this on YouTube or wherever, you can see Hanks has quite a lengthy conversation with Harryhausen as they're sort of going off stage. And you can't hear what they're talking about, but you can sort of imagine, I'm sure it's Tom sort of bowing down and say, "Oh, yeah, man, I love your films," And then he turns back to the audience and Tom Hanks says, "Some say Casablanca, some say Citizen Kane. I say Jason and the Argonauts is the greatest movie ever made." Wow. Mr. Tom Hanks.
That's a great endorsement. There you go. Well, you mentioned there Ray Bradbury, and that kind of like a trio of friendships there with Ray Bradbury, Ray Harryhausen, and another key figure in monster cinema, Forrest J. Ackerman, who are all friends from like their late teens all through their lives, and all three of them had major impact on the visual identity of monster cinema.
Definitely, they really sort of started fandom as we know it today. Forry was hugely responsible for that all his life, and you now see people like Guillermo del Toro, who've Guillermo's got these two huge houses that are packed with sort of monster memorabilia and stuff, and Forry was doing that way back. His house was like that, and so you have these people now who've made very successful careers out of what they do, and they're collecting lots of sort of movie memorabilia and posters and figurines and things. And they can now live that Forrest J. Ackerman experience. It's fantastic. But yeah, Ray Bradbury and Ray Harryhausen were right there with Forry as he was sort of formulating all this stuff. And as I say, more or less creating what we know today as fantasy film fandom.
Yeah, I mean, Forrest Jackman obviously was the creator of Famous Monsters of Filmland, a very influential magazine that ran for many, many years. But Ray Bradbury, obviously a writer, a titan in the world of writing, I guess, particularly like science fiction and fantasy fiction.
Yeah. Now, he met Ray Harryhausen in 1938, and I'm not sure if it was actually at a screening of King Kong or if it was they bumped into each other and were talking about it somewhere. But they realised that they were sort of kindred spirits, and they actually signed a pact when they were sort of in their sort of mid to late teens to say, A, we'll be friends for life, and B, we'll love dinosaurs for life.
It's not a hard pact to make, is it? I mean, the first part possibly, but the second part, loving dinosaurs is fine.
Who doesn't? Who doesn't? Yeah.
So like Ray started out fairly early in his life, knowing pretty much what he wanted to do. He wanted to be involved in this kind of cinema.
Yeah. Well, this was after seeing King Kong. His auntie took him to see Kong, and he just couldn't believe what he was watching. He did recognise, he would have been probably sort of 13, 14, 15 or something, and he was canny enough to sort of know what he was looking at there, while everyone else was sort of marvelling, oh, there's a giant gorilla at the top of the Empire State Building. He was too, but he also sensed how it had been done. He sort of recognised, oh, it's model work of some kind, and set out trying to sort of find out more about it. Actually contacted Willis O'Brien, the guy who sort of masterminded the effects for Kong, and sent drawings and things to him over the years. Ended up working for him, as we'll talk about, and then struck up this friendship with Ray Bradbury. And by that point, and we're still in the late 30s here, Ray Harryhausen is already starting to make his own little amateur stop motion movies at home, some of which, again, you can see online if, there are little clips and things that we'll point out to people as we go along. One of the very early ones is he'd got this very ambitious plan to make a stop motion film called Evolution of the World. And it was going to be like the history of dinosaurs, from the birth of the dinosaur right through to their demise. And he managed to film an absolutely fantastic dinosaur fight sequence, which, is, and it's in colour as well. This is sort of 1938, 39 or something, So, yeah, he's still only a teenager at this point, but the talent is already there from day one, He said that he scrapped plans for the film after filming this short sequence because he went to see Fantasia, the Disney movie, and he saw the dinosaur sequence in that, and he thought, oh, they've nicked my idea. They've done what I was going to do in cartoon form, and he abandoned it and just moved on to the next thing.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously had that drive and that passion fairly early on. He was doing, whilst he was at high school, he was doing evening classes at high school. He was doing evening classes in photography and art direction and editing and things like that.
Yeah.
So you're obviously a driven person fairly early on. Yeah.
And again, you get all the stories that often happens when you talk about artists like Ray, where his family were very supportive. As I say, his auntie took him to see King Kong. He knew nothing about it, He sure did after seeing it, but people were buying him cameras and things as Christmas presents. And as Ray Bradbury has pointed out, Harryhausen's mum and dad were so helpful, not just supportive in a sense of, we love what our son's doing, but actually joining in. His dad was a carpenter and would make little miniature sets for him. And his mum would sew costumes for the sort of early puppet characters that he was using. So in things like the Mother Goose films that he did in the 40s and things like that. So they were actually a hands-on family. It was the kids doing all this great stuff, reinventing special effects in the cinema. not that anyone knew at that time, but his mum and dad are sort of chipping in as well. It's great, you know.
So he went to he joined the army and worked during the war, and had the remarkable experience of working underneath a Colonel Frank Capra.
Indeed,
Which,
yeah.
must have been a wonderful life, mustn't it? You know, so he's like, you know, he's in the war, he's working as a loader, clapper boy, a gopher, you know, camera assistant under Frank Capra, which must have been like more school for him, really.
Sure. You know, how perfect.
And obviously, he retained contact with Willis O'Brien throughout those years, and through those years of correspondence, he ended up being hired to work on Mighty Joe Young, which we've talked about on the podcast,
and to take the lion's share of the work as well. Willis O'Brien at that point saw himself as being a sort of mentor and a sort of supervisor rather than a hands-on animator. So it was great for him to be able to bring Ray and a couple of other young lads in to take the bulk of the actual physical work on that. And Ray in particular is largely responsible for the major share of the animation work there, and in particular on Joe himself. So,
and obviously that must have been a massive calling card, because it's an amazing piece of work, the animation in this one. You know,
and I imagine what it was like for Ray as well. You know, you've got to know Willis O'Brien over the years as a fan, and you've been sending him stuff, and he's been writing back to you. You know, so you're sort of feeling, oh yeah, me and Willis are sort of like that. You know. Then he gets this job offer when he comes out of the army. Oh, I'm making a new movie. Do you want to help? You know, imagine that. You know, it's like being asked to be in your favourite band or something.
Well, he delivered more on that one, and again, I guess imbuing into Joe what would become a trademark of Ray's work, the amount of character that you get in his animation. You fully buy into the characters that he creates through stop motion.
He's said this himself. He's said throughout his career that he always puts a lot of himself into the into the characters. And I think it was Mighty Joe Young. I'm sure he said this on Mighty Joe Young. He'd normally have a coffee and a couple of biscuits for his tea break, sort of in between working, you know. And on Mighty Joe Young, he changed that and he started eating celery and carrots because he wanted to sort of feel vegetarian so that he would feel more in tune with how Mighty Joe Young felt.
Method animation.
Indeed. Yeah. They're the lengths that he was going to, you know. And you can see that right through his career. You know, you can tell there's always a little bit of Ray in there. Right up to the point to jump right ahead to the end of his career. It's been said about Clash of the Titans, his very last film, that contains scenes of the live action actors, people like Laurence Olivier and so on, playing the gods, the Greek gods. And there's this whole thing in Clash of the Titans where they're actually manipulating the fates of the characters by moving pieces of them around on a game board at the top of Mount Olympus or wherever. And some people, in fact, close friends of Ray, including Ray Bradbury, had sort of pointed out to him that that's you. You know, you manipulate little models and tell them what to do. And he admitted it and said, yeah, I suppose it is, you know. So there's that element in there, I think, of, yeah, I'm the puppet master. But yeah, there's also a kinder element which goes right back to Mighty Joe Young and maybe even earlier. As you say, Adam, that's a great description, method, animation, and really wanting to put yourself in these characters. And he took that from what he'd recognised in Willis O'Brien, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So we move into the 1950s and he gets his first fully solo project. And again, it's teaming up with his old friend Ray Bradbury for The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. So it's the first one he was fully in charge of all the technical effects. It's a movie that inspired Godzilla. So we've mentioned it on the Godzilla podcast. And it's one of the first of its kind, I guess, in that respect.
Yeah, it really sets the template. It's the first giant monster invades a city movie,
Yeah.
really. There'd been elements of that. Willis O'Brien had done a version of The Lost World, the Arthur Conan Doyle story, in the 20s, in the silent era. And that ended with a brontosaurus rampaging around London. Then, of course, you get Kong, where that happens in New York. But here it's the whole story. It's not just 10 minutes tacked on at the end. It's pretty much the whole thing is a major American city under attack by a huge dinosaur or some kind of huge creature. So really does set the template for Godzilla, and then decades of monster movies ever since, and people are still making them and still being influenced by it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it set the template for what he would do for most of the 1950s, with one exception, where it was these monsters from the deep. We had It Came From Beneath the Sea in 1955.
Yeah, which is San Francisco. Yeah.
We had 20 Million Miles to Earth in 1957. And we also had a little foray into science, more overt alien science fiction with Earth versus the Flying Saucers.
Yeah.
Three great movies there in the mid 50s, and they've all got this interesting, which I found interesting device, is that they're kind of like presented as documentary.
Yeah.
So it's got this weird sort of like, it's almost like you're watching a newsreel of what's been happening to San Francisco, and they're retelling the story, which must have been an interesting device. Obviously, I'm assuming, coming from the war period, that kind of newsreels of the war, newsreels of world events coming through it, and that device just carried over into fiction cinema.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, that's I suppose what audiences would have been used to in terms of presentation, because they'd have been seeing newsreels at the cinema. So to get this sort of documentary style, and it was feeding into crime movies a little bit as well around that time. And you were getting things, films like Kansas City Confidential and stuff were coming out. Even Billy Wilder's Ace in the Hole and films like that, were all about that sort of news experience and that way of telling a story to the public. And of course, it sort of died out in monster movies for years after that, until more in the 21st century, it started coming back with things like Cloverfield and some of the recent Kong and Godzilla films. And I suppose it's the internet that has done that. We're now seeing internet films in the way that the Ray Harryhausen films were newsreel films.
Yeah.
The public understanding is the same.
So, and he really sort of like finds his groove during this period, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He gets the monsters down pat. He gets the characterization of the monsters really down well. Yeah, and he knows what he's doing.
Yeah. And the city backdrops are interesting as well, because we didn't mention Washington for Earth versus the Flying Saucers, and then Rome for the Emir in 20 Million Miles to Earth. So he's established this sort of template again, where he's using major global cities as the backdrop. So he's able to use things like monuments, and he'll either use photographs of the monuments as a backdrop, or in the case of Earth versus the Flying Saucers, absolutely spectacularly, he animates the destruction of the buildings.
Yeah.
There's no big monster in that one. What you've got is flying saucers. You've got sort of dome-headed aliens in sort of metallic armor, and you've got to have the destruction of the building. So there's no monster for him to focus on in that one. So instead of that, he animates the flying saucers, which can't have been massively taxing, But then the real job comes in right. How are we going to destroy the Washington Monument? Oh, I know. I'll do an animated version of it, and I'll dangle bits on wires and photograph them to make it look as though it's crumbling, And the end result is fantastic and almost unique for Harryhausen, in that it's a very different sort of project for him.
I think it definitely builds on that sort of like the idea of putting major monuments in these kind of movies as a recognizable thing for the audience. Kong's climbing Empire State Building. You know, it takes that one step further, doesn't it?
Yeah. Move forward though to 1996, and we get Independence Day and we get Mars Attacks. Yeah. One of which sells itself on the fact that it's going to be blowing up major global monuments, and the other, the Independence Day, that one, and then Mars Attacks, which directly spoofs Earth versus the Flying Saucers.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's still current in the mid-90s. You know, Harryhausen is still a massive influence on the two big summer hits of that year.
The other 1950s movie that sort of like I guess looms large over Harryhausen's career is The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad in 1958, which kind of set him off on this sort of like strand of his work that involved like myths and legends, as opposed to monsters and aliens. So there was, and this was a huge hit, 1958. Kerwin Matthews in the lead, and set a lot of the tone for what he would do in those later Sinbad, Clash of the Titans, and indeed Jason and the Argonauts movies.
Sure, yeah. There's a great Cyclops character in it who gets involved in monster fights. And that sets the model really for, I suppose, the scenes with Talos later on in Jason and the Argonauts. And then Harryhausen returns to that sort of character with the Trog figure in the last Sinbad movie in 1977, and then even Calibos in Clash of the Titans. You can see the roots of all of that in this Cyclops figure here. But of course, the big scene in Seventh Voyage is the battle between Sinbad and one animated skeleton.
Yeah, I mean, again, one is not enough, Daryl.
No. I mean, that's a groundbreaker.
But we need more than one.
Yeah, we didn't know what was going to come later. So I gather, talking about myths, and Harryhausen always sort of shifted myths around a little bit and changed them. You know, because he's a filmmaker. You know, he's not going to stick to the truth necessarily and stick to the source material. I gather that, rather than depicting the seventh voyage of Sinbad, this film actually sort of takes elements from the third and fifth voyages of Sinbad. So there you go. But who needs the truth? You know, print the legend.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I, no one's going back and reading those books who are eight years old in the cinema watching Sinbad. They're not worrying about accuracy, are they? In that respect.
No. But as you say, it sets up. We've got these two strands of Harryhausen. There's the very sort of gritty newsreel like monster invade your city film, but then this shift into a more fantastic realm, and as you say, based on sort of ancient myths from Greece or from the Middle East or wherever it might be. And it's that came to sort of dominate Harryhausen's cinema, especially in the final sort of decade of his career later on. We were saying before, when we were sort of running through Harryhausen's films before we started recording today, how Seventh Voyage of Sinbad almost fits as a little anomaly in his career, because if that had been made in 1971, it'd make sense because the two other Sinbad films follow straight on, But being made in 1958, it just doesn't sort of fit, it sticks out, and but it's good that it does, because as I say, it paves the way for other things that came later in his career, in particular the classic Harryhausen scene, which we'll discuss later.
Yeah, well, before we get to arguably Tom Hanks's version of what a masterpiece is, we've got a couple of other films in between Sinbad's first voyage or seventh voyage in this case. We got the Three Worlds of Gulliver.
Yeah,
which was a favourite in my household. My grandma used to play that all the time. We had two versions of the Gulliver story. We had the Fleischer Brothers animated feature, and we had the live action one. And we always wanted the cartoon, and my grandma always wanted the live action one. And looking back, I think maybe she was right.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Still not sure, but maybe she was right.
Yeah, it's the Harryhausen film that I've probably seen less than any other. It seemed to not be available for many years. And I actually picked a copy up on DVD only last year at a film festival. And so I watched it again and fell in love with it all over again. I'd not seen it since watching it on TV as a kid, probably going back to the mid-70s or something. So it was almost like rediscovering it, watching it all over again as new, you know. Yeah, again, it's in that fantasy realm. It's in the world of animated creatures and human characters appearing in the same frame, you know. So again, it's giving us a taste of what might be coming in 10 or 15 years time, and it's got, again, one scene that everybody comes away talking about, which is the fight with a sort of animated alligator, I guess. Often the case with Harryhausen, you know, the films are all great all the way through, but there always seems to be this one scene in every one that everybody comes away saying, "Oh, that's the bit we remember," you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we screened it on 35mm a few years ago now at one of the festivals in Derby, and it just struck me how well it held up over the years.
Yeah.
You know, it's obviously, a film made in 1960, so it's like 50 plus years old, you know. It just held together really well. Obviously, the story, you know, it's based on a novel, so it kind of holds together. But the animation techniques really just pop off the screen, which is, I guess, why Harryhausen has retained his appeal throughout the years. Is that those iconic scenes still are iconic? You know, they still pop off the screen straight away when you watch them now, as they did back in the 60s.
Yeah,
really impressive. So it works on Mysterious Island in 1961, which, again, another great example of Harryhausen's work. But he was just resting, really, I guess, for what is probably gone down as his masterpiece, and Jason and the Argonauts in 1963. Most Harryhausen movies, as you just said, Daryl, have one key scene that people come away talking about. This one's got 4. So, you know, he really ups the ante on that, where there's like at least 2 or 3, maybe 4 scenes in this movie.
I'd agree. Yeah. Now, the first thing I want to mention here is one of Ray's early projects, which he filmed a little bit for and then abandoned, was called The Elementals. And there's a couple of minutes of footage, and there's a few drawings around that he did. Incredible artwork. If you get a chance to see some of Ray's art, it's brilliant. And he was going to do this film called The Elementals, and it was going to be about these humanoid bat creatures, giant bat creatures, that nested at the top of the Eiffel Tower and then swooped down and attacked Paris. And he scrapped it. He filmed a couple of minutes of footage and then scrapped the whole thing. So there's these few shots that you can see, and a raft of drawings. And but then you get the harpies sequence in Jason and the Argonauts, and nothing goes to waste with Harryhausen. There you go. You know, it's the Elementals right there. So, and what a sequence that is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those sequences where in any other movie, that's the standout sequence. That's
yeah.
We're talking about. Here, it's probably the least impressive.
Yeah, it's filler. Yeah,
it is. It really kind of feels that way alongside like the Hydra. I mean, that and the Hydra are the two that you think, okay, they're okay, but then. Talos, the giant bronze statue being brought to life, which just is incredible, really. That's the whole sequence is incredible. The sense of scale, sense of size, just really, really stands out.
Yeah, apparently Talos in the myths is a figure that stands about 8 or 9 feet high, so Ray said. And they didn't want to do that. They went for the Colossus of Rhodes. That was the idea. They wanted, it's got to be bigger. It's got to be bigger. And how great it is! I mean, there's so many great things about Talos in that. As well as Ray's work, which is fabulous, among the best that he ever did, I think, because you're dealing with a sort of metallic creation here rather than anything organic, which you're more used to with Harryhausen. And even already at that point you were with the dinosaurs and monsters. And suddenly here's something a little bit different, And the animation style's slightly different too. He's recognised that the movements have got to be slower, they've got to be more deliberate. He can't do anything with the face because it's immovable. So all the expression has got to be in the model as it's sculpted, And the audience have then got to project their interpretation of what this living statue is actually thinking and what they're contemplating, and it works. You buy it; it's brilliant. And then, aside from Harryhausen's work, you've got the sound effects. The score's working really well over that scene. Great sort of, again, ponderous sort of slow-moving sort of music tones over that, coupled with brilliant Foley work on the sort of creaks and the sort of unoiled sort of feel as the limbs and bits and pieces on the figure move, and you get all of these sort of metallic creaking sounds on the soundtrack. It's just brilliant, and again, the way Harryhausen not only animates the model, but the way it's all mattered in to the scenes of the live actors, possibly the best that you'd ever seen up until that point. And then it itself got trumped later in the same movie.
Yeah, I mean, the whole sequence with Telos running around, so like the crew of the Argonaut running around sort of like along the beaches where Telos is coming, just adds to that. I mean, it's the minor point of that whole sequence, but really adds to the sort of like how
you believe it. Yeah, you do. Exactly. You buy it because they're moving in the way that people would move if they were faced with that. It's brilliantly choreographed.
Yeah, no, fantastic. But as you say, it is
probably way down the list of highlights
later on, as we get towards the finale of the movie, where the teeth of the Hydra are thrown asunder to the ground and the skeletons rise from the earth.
So you're actually glossing over the fact that Ray spent months and months and months animating the seven heads of the Hydra for that battle.
It's remarkable.
That's nothing. Forget that.
It kind of is, though. It kind of is. I mean, the Hydra is obviously a great feat of stop motion animation and the movement of the heads.
Yeah. But again, it's there to serve a purpose, and that purpose is
to die so they can pull the teeth. They pull the teeth and they resurrect the skeletons, and then you have 7 skeletons fighting Sinbad and his fighting Jason and the crew.
Yeah. It's effectively Sinbad again. This is the thing about Harryhausen. These, who's Harry Hamlin playing in Clash of the Titans? He's called Perseus, but it's the same guy. It's the hero. It's the sword wielding hero. So Jason in this case. But yeah, I mean, if it had been 2 skeletons or 3. We'd have been thrilled, after seeing 7th Voyage of Sinbad. You'd be thinking, oh, it's the skeleton guy again. And he's given us more. He's done 2 this time. No, 7.
Yeah.
And again, you imagine the work that he's had to put into that. Do the maths on that. Ray has done the maths for us, actually. In an interview that I was watching in the week from some years ago, Ray said each skeleton had 5 particular points of articulation. And so he said, every single frame of film, I had to do 35 movements. Not one like most stop motion people do, 35.
No, and just the complexity of and also not just the stop motion movements, just the matting it into the actual fight scenes with the actor as well. So making sure that he still flows perfectly.
Yeah, they did this on 1 or 2 of the films. They actually prepped that with a rehearsal using stuntmen, and they get the actual cast, the people who were going to be in the film. And they'd sort of fake a fight with stuntmen. I think there are stills of this on the set, and then once they'd sort of figured out all the moves and everything, the stuntmen came away and the actors just went through the same motions again, and they were filmed. And Ray's then got his template to animate the skeletons into. But again, brilliantly done, and how much thought went into that, is amazing. And again, it works probably even better than the scene we were just talking about with Talos and the guys on the beach.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's one of those things where the fight scene ends and the movie ends pretty quickly because, what are you going to do?
You can't
do after that. You can't top that. So let's just get out. Let's get out and send people home.
Yeah, but I mean, there's so many great components to that scene as well. The sowing of the Hydra's teeth is in itself is great because you're thinking, what's coming? What is going to happen here? What are we going to see? Is it going to be another Hydra? Is that going to come back to life? That's your first thought. No, it's something worse. Then you see these 7 mounds of earth start to sort of form in the dirt, and then a skeleton head pops up. And you think, oh, right, yeah, it's the 7th Voyage of Sinbad again. And then another one comes, and you're thinking, blimey, what are we in for? There's 7 of these things on the way, And then you get the close-up of all 7 heads sort of staring directly at you in the audience with intent, with swords and shields raised. That's terrifying. And then they scream twice. And then they rush towards us.
Yeah.
Those 3 things build and build and build the terror. And then finally it's relieved. And the relief only comes because they're not attacking us, they're attacking the characters on screen. Suddenly we're identifying with the characters on screen who are being assaulted by this army of skulls and bones, Whenever he did interviews, Ray always, he often brought one of the surviving skeletons with him because a lot of his models have sort of crumbled or rotted over time. And he spent some years making bronze versions of them after he retired so that there'd be something to sort of leave behind. But he did used to sort of tour around the UK, and he actually came to Derby in 1990. And he'd always have like a big suitcase or 2 cases, and he got all of his surviving creatures with them. And he let small children sort of touch these things and handle them. It was incredible. I guess he just thought if they get damaged, they're probably going to rot anyway in a few years. So I'd rather see the kids enjoying them, And so yeah, I've actually handled one of those skeletons. I've actually touched one, which this was 31 years ago, and I'd have been in my late 20s then, but I felt about 4. It was great. Ray Harryhausen's there. Oh, I've got one of his skeletons. Brilliant. But whenever he did sort of tours, and often they'd show Jason and the Argonauts as the movie, and one line he always came out with is Andrew Folds, the actor, is one of the characters in battle who gets stabbed by a skeleton wielding a sword. And Andrew Folds then became a Labour MP a few years later. And whenever this was pointed out to Ray, he always just said, oh, yeah, it was a Conservative skeleton.
Let's not politicise, Jason. Well, after that, he kind of he didn't do nothing because he did he works with Hammer Studios. BC and the long-standing Willis O'Brien, Ray Harryhausen dream projects together, the Valley of Guanji.
Yeah. We've jumped over as well one that's worth mentioning briefly because of its association. He and his regular producer, Charles Schneer, who we've not mentioned yet. Charles Schneer is as important to these films as Ray. Ray worked with the same producer all his life. Other than Ray's films, he's perhaps best known because he produced Hellcats of the Navy, the only film that Ron and Nancy Reagan appeared in together. You said we weren't going to politicise this, Adam, but I've jumped straight back in and done that, I'm afraid. So Charles Schneer produced Hellcats of the Navy in the 50s, and he was already working with Ray at that time. He also produced Half a Sixpence, the Tommy Steele movie. Why I mention Half a Sixpence is it's based on Kipps, the novel by H.G. Wells, and I guess Schneer had done some kind of package deal on Wells' novels because the Harryhausen film that we've missed was an adaptation of First Men in the Moon. not Harryhausen's finest hour, I would say. Lionel Jeffries is fantastic in it and steals the show. It's that rare Harryhausen film where the animated scenes are not the best stuff in the movie.
It does feel like his heart's not quite in it on this one.
Yeah.
He's doing it, he's working, but it's not what he wants to do.
Yeah,
I think one of the things that we talked about when we talk about his partnership with Charles Schneer is like the directors of these movies had a very clear instruction when they signed on. This is not like any other movie that you direct. This is Ray Harryhausen's movie.
Yeah, Ray tells you what to do. Yeah.
Everything else is Ray's department. He's the creative force.
Yeah,
as much as anything on this film.
Yeah. And this is why we've not mentioned the directors by name so far, because they don't really matter in a conventional sense. They're there to do a journeyman's job, really. And when you look through the list of directors, they are effectively people who did that. They were jobbing directors rather than auteurs, But I think we need to jump on to 1 million years BC now, and the film at Hammer, which you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I mean, he did is it just the 2 movies he did with Hammer, 1 million years BC and Gwangi?
Well, Gwangi's not a Hammer film, so it's
just
the one. No, he only worked on one film for Hammer. So Valley of Gwangi
feels like a Hammer film.
Yeah, it does. It does. But no, that was done for Warner Brothers and Seven Arts. So, but yeah, it's the follow-on from 1 million years BC. So I can see the association there. Yeah. And they both films have got an Allosaurus or a similar sort of dinosaur as their sort of key monster focus as well. So,
well, I guess 1 million years BC is kind of the monsters to get overshadowed by Raquel Welch, I guess. This one.
Raquel in her fur bikini, which alludes back to our podcast on the 1994 Oscars, of course, because you've got Raquel in the bikini up on the cell wall in The Shawshank Redemption, hiding the secret of Shawshank. So
she was the last. The
60s representative. Yes. But yeah, I mean, she just became a superstar overnight because of that photograph, that publicity photograph. And that, as you say, sort of took all the heat off Harryhausen a little bit. It was, which is a shame because there are some fantastic animation sequences in there. Raquel being carried off by a pterodactyl, the big fight with the sort of allosaur or whatever, however they designate this particular dinosaur, with the cavemen sort of coming in with pointy sticks and sort of fending it off is almost the great forgotten Harryhausen sequence. I think I'd say that's top 3, and yet it's never talked about.
No, I guess maybe it is because it feels like you've got Raquel front and center, you've got Hammer as a studio taking some of the attention away, and it feels like it's a job for hire in many ways,
Yeah. I think it was. Again, I don't think Harryhausen was particularly in love with the project, but it was, Hammer Films come to you, you're a dinosaur fan, and they say, do you want to make some dinosaurs for us? You say yes. Yeah. But he never worked for them again, and there would have been opportunities because they then did When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth in the late 60s, and it was Jim Danforth's team that ended up taking the gig there. But I'm sure if Harryhausen and Schneer had sort of thrown their names into the ring, they'd have got that one. But they just finished work on Gwangi at that time, and obviously they got other plans. They were looking ahead to Sinbad and so on. And Ray at this point was starting to slow down because after that you get a film every 4 years.
Yeah.
Until he retired.
Winding down as such. Gwangi's an interesting one because it does take elements from the roots of his career.
Yeah.
With Willis O'Brien's
Well, Willis O'Brien had devised this project. He was going to make it just under the name Gwangi in the 1940s. He devised it during World War II and was going to film it whenever possible. I don't know if he ever did any test footage for it. I've never seen any, but I think there are drawings and so on. And then O'Brien got involved in the 50s with a film called The Black Scorpion, which is about a giant scorpion. Which unfortunately they sort of rather botched the animation on that. So in some of the scenes, you don't see a model animated scorpion. You just get the sort of black matte outline of it. So yeah, it's a bit of a rush job, that one. But why I mentioned the Black Scorpion is it does combine these elements of a giant monster attack and the sort of desert set western. Which O'Brien had obviously recycled from Gwangi, and then Schneer and Harryhausen in the late 60s looking for their next project after 1 million years BC, filling time until they move on to reviving Sinbad. They revive this old Willis O'Brien project, and they do it really well. And I think it works well. And as Harryhausen himself said, who doesn't love a monster? And also, how big were westerns in the late 60s? This is released around the same time as stuff like True Grit and Once Upon a Time in the West and the Wild Bunch and so on. Westerns are at a peak, and let's do one and throw an Allosaurus into it. Why not?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the Ray Harryhausen of imbuing a character with characterization and is front and center in Gwangi.
And again, you've got jobbing director, you've got second division actors, no superstars in there, but they're all people that can come in and do a job. Well, they're basically people who can come in, and if you tell them to stand in a particular place or move to a particular place, they're capable of doing it. And that's what Ray Harryhausen needs.
Yeah,
and in this one, you need the horses that do it as well. And of course, the famous scene from the movie, which apparently is a direct lift from Willis O'Brien's own notes, is the actual lassoing of the dinosaur.
Yeah,
which is a terrific sequence, and the one you'll always see on clip shows.
Yeah, and harkens back to Mighty Joe Young as well.
Indeed, yeah. Never waste an idea.
No, absolutely not.
And if you can get away with repeating an idea, repeat it.
Well, it's a different generation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Movies weren't being recycled again and again on TV and DVDs and things like that. So
sure.
The chance of people seeing that probably. But yeah, so then we get into the early 70s and they go back. They go back to 1950s and they go back to Columbia. And get the rights to Sinbad again, and
so we get two sequels to Seventh Voyage of Sinbad belatedly.
Well, it's fascinating because they the way that they talked about Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger from 1977 is not a sequel. They're very adamant that it's not a sequel. Hence, none of the actors are returning, and it's just a different crew. But starting with the Golden Voyage of Sinbad, which I sat and watched last night, which is fantastic.
It's brilliant.
Really, really brilliant, yeah. And
from start to finish, I mean, we've been talking about highlights from Harryhausen, and we've singled out Jason and the Argonauts as the one film that holds together as a story, and it's peppered with great scenes. I think Golden Voyage of Sinbad lays claim to being the second best in that sense, as a full movie. It really does work as a proper film, rather than you just saying, oh, there's that great fight scene or the bit where two dinosaurs have a fight or whatever. Here, it's great from start to finish.
It's got a clear and effective villain in Tom Baker. It's like you know where you stand. He's the goodie, he's the baddie, and then you've got all the things in between.
Yeah. But of course, this is Tom Baker really before he became Tom Baker as well. So this is made the year before he gets the gig as the Doctor in Doctor Who.
Well, that's right. I mean, they went and saw him in the cinema.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's sort of known for playing Rasputin in Nicholas and Alexandra and one or two other little bit parts. He'd done The Mutations that year, sort of cheapo horror film directed by Jack Cardiff of all people. And Golden Voyage of Sinbad is like the kickstart of his fame and his major career.
Yeah, absolutely, and
he's great in it.
He is great in it. Yeah, absolutely.
You can see why he grabbed everyone's attention.
I mean, the use of his eyes in this movie.
Oh yeah.
And then he shows what he does. In his career generally, he's a very expressive actor.
Yeah. Now Ray had moved to England. He'd moved to live in London in the early '60s because he'd always had a hankering to live and work in Europe. And then they found on films like 20 Million Miles to Earth and Mysterious Island that European settings would be ideal for the backdrops, the city of Rome for one. And then when they were looking for a sort of deserted island, they found locations in Spain that would be perfect. And Ray thought, oh, this is great. Finally, I can achieve my dream. I can move to Europe and live there. And he came to live in London, based himself in London, effectively became a British citizen, or had dual British-American citizenship, and lived in London for the rest of his life. And eventually, he got a new next-door neighbour, Caroline Monroe, who we then see in the Sinbad movies. So yeah, they were sort of mates for years, and then worked together.
Caroline Monroe, I think she's a really interesting actress in the sense that she's been in a Bond film, she was in the Sinbad movies. She's got a whole range of different films in her career. For someone who is often dismissed as a hammer.
Well, she was a sort of typical traditional model turned actress, with all the connotations of that, and she is one of the people who actually transcended that and gives genuinely good performances, as you say, across a range of films as well. And she's ideal for this. She's ideal for the world of Harryhausen. And I think what makes Golden Voyage of Sinbad stand out is you've got these. They are sort of cipher characters in a way. They're there just to sort of walk on and off in between the monsters. But you've actually got people with genuine character in their faces there, and people that can hold the audience's attention. They're not going to win any Oscars or anything, but then neither was Ray, as we've said, but they're people that are doing a better job than you normally get in a Ray Harryhausen movie.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you got like the actor who plays the drunken son of the bar owner guy. He was so good. They brought him back for Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger.
Yeah.
So.
But again, to get onto this idea of the scenes you talk about on your way home, Harryhausen famously had when they'd animated the octopus in It Came From Beneath the Sea, he built an 8-armed octopus, 8-tentacled octopus, and he realised it was going to be very expensive and time-consuming to animate 8 tentacles, so he cut 2 off. Yeah. And we come back to this 6-limbed idea with the idea of Golden Voyage of Sinbad. It was originally going to be an Indian-based movie. And so the remnant of that is you get the goddess Kali in statue form, comes to life, wielding 6 swords. And again, what a fight sequence that is.
Yeah, it's another one of those ones where it blends the sort of like the awe-inspiring animation techniques of animating 6 arms moving at the same time and a fight sequence. Just really well done.
Again, the funny story on that is that they did the same with that as they did with Jason and the Argonauts. Like I said earlier, they got stuntmen in to sort of act out the parts of the skeletons so that the cast would know where to sort of wave their swords around, and then they went and filmed it. In this instance, they actually tied 3 stuntmen together with a belt. So you've got this 6-armed, sort of 60-stone monstrosity wandering around the set, trying to not to bump into things. And they sort of choreographed it all for the sake of the actors, Ray knew what he was going to do, but for the sake of the actors, they choreographed it so that they got a 6-armed figure to look at. Yeah, they tied 3 stuntmen together. Imagine, I wish footage. I'd love to see that on a DVD or Blu-ray extra or something. You know, I'm sure not that any footage of that has been long destroyed, but maybe there are photos out there somewhere. But that'd be a sight to see. That's the great movie that Ray Harryhausen never made. You know, the invasion of the 6-armed stuntman. But yeah, that Carly sequence. However they sort of arrived at it, you know, it was worth the wait because it is fantastic.
Yeah, it definitely stands out as like you say, as the scene really, isn't it, in this movie. But you get quite a lot of miniature work as well in this movie. Quite a lot of I guess on what's the word I'm looking for, stuff that's not designed to stand out.
Yeah.
It's like the monkey playing chess.
Yeah.
Just
little incidental details and things that'll take a lot of work to do, but they're just there as little moments, you know, things that might look good in the stills or in the trailer or something, you know, and they all add texture to it and they all add flavour and colour to it. But yeah, I think that's a proof of a sort of maturing filmmaker in Harryhausen there, in terms of it doesn't all have to be spectacle. Every time I animate something, it doesn't have to be a battle with the dinosaur. You know, much as I'd love it to be, let's do these little quieter moments as well.
Yeah, and bizarrely, they do stand out.
Yeah.
Second and third viewings. And we get a call back to the masthead from Jason the Argonauts in this one.
Yeah.
Whereas the goddess Hera was very helpful.
Yeah.
This particular masthead is not very helpful.
Yeah, indeed. Now, Harryhausen's pointed out, he said when he did his research, he realised they'd made not a mistake entirely. They sort of knew what they were doing, but they sort of slightly overlooked something in that in the Muslim world where the film is set, mastheads on boats aren't really a thing. And he sort of realised that and thought, oh, we'll have to take it away then. And then thought, well, no, my films are fantasy. They're set in my world. I can do what I like, you know. And this masthead is great, and it's a callback to Jason and the Argonauts and the great one there. And we can do something different with it. We can make this one more sinister. We're keeping it. So they did.
Yeah, and it's a great sequence.
Yeah,
and it was a big hit.
Yeah, fabulous. Yeah, it was the quintessential take your kids to see it. And as they always said in the 70s, you know, Caroline Monroe is there as what they used to call something for the dads.
Yeah, that classic Doctor Who thing.
Yeah.
Dads, yeah. As I say, it holds up really well as it goes by. And it's a huge hit. And they went back to it. They went back to Sinbad straight away with the sequel, but which they deliberately decided that wasn't going to be a sequel. It was just a different movie.
Now, what do you make of Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, Adam? Because I'm not all that keen.
I'm not. I don't think it's a very good film at all. But and it astounded me in doing the research that it cost about £4 million more, because it looks like it does. It looks like it looks like it was done on the cheap.
Oh yeah. It's got a very sort of murky, mottled sort of look to it, almost like they're using a lot of back projection or something at times. You know, I'm sure they're not, but a
lot of it looks like it was like shot day for night.
Yeah, it's got that feel to it. There's something a bit weird about the quality of the visual tone of it, and I can't quite put my finger on it. Almost like you're watching it through 5 layers of gauze at some point, you know. And then the animation is as always fantastic, but the problem with it is you've got characters like the Minotaur, which is just a smaller bull version of Talos from Jason and the Argonauts. We've seen that, Ray. You've got this battle with 3 fire demons, which are basically a cross between the ant creatures from First Men in the Moon and the skeletons from Jason and the Argonauts. We've seen that, Ray. The original creatures aren't all that great either. You've got a giant walrus, which is quite fun when you first see it sort of come out of the ice. But other than that, you've got a giant walrus with big tusks. We've seen it. What are you going to do now? Not very much. And then the tiger itself, again, there's this notion, Ray Harryhausen animating a saber-toothed tiger as the main monstrous figure of this movie. That sounds pretty promising, Now, as I said before, Ray always got his mum and dad to sort of help out with his early films as a teenager. And when he was doing his Evolution of the World movie, the one that was going to tell the history of the dinosaurs, he sculpted and made a model of a woolly mammoth, which he never got round to animating because he abandoned the film beforehand. But he still had that woolly mammoth in his collection. He kept the model all these years. And the fur for that model was used by him cutting squares off his mum's fur coat. And apparently she didn't know about this, but she was okay with it when she found out. The mammoth looks great. The tiger, the saber-toothed tiger in Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, looks as though it's wearing bits of Ray Harryhausen's mum's fur coat. It's not a good look for a big budget movie made in 1977.
No, it does feel like, maybe we're talking post Star Wars world now around the same time, isn't it? And
yeah.
You've got Star Wars happening around the same time.
This would have come out just ahead of Star Wars, as I remember, and it's probably the last film of its type, really. The last movie of that sort of old school, old fashioned, take your kids to see it on Easter Monday sort of thing, and almost the last film of Ray's career. And it would have been sad if he'd sort of bowed out on that one. So I'm pleased that 4 years later we at least got Clash of the Titans.
Yeah, one of the things about Sinbad is Jane Seymour's pretty good in it.
Yeah.
However, most of the rest of the cast are not very good at all.
No.
So it's unfortunate after Golden Voyage of Simba, where the acting really helps elevate it, that it's a little bit let down on this one.
Yeah.
But, as you say, 4 years later, we get Ray's swan song before retirement in Clash of the Titans, a movie which has got its own, I guess, legacy now with two remakes, a sequel.
And I think those sequels are fuel for the argument for those people who love to slate CGI and say the old effects were the best. There's your proof right there, I think. Yeah. Clash of the Titans versus Clash of the Titans.
So it's an interesting movie in the sense that it hasn't really got it. It tries to fashion a clear-cut plot from it, and it kind of struggles a little bit.
Yeah. It's no Jason and the Argonauts, even though it sort of tries to be. But it does end up as a series of set pieces rather than a sort of coherent narrative. But what set pieces?
Yeah, again, there's another one where there's arguably two great sequences in it. You've got the Kraken.
Yeah.
That whole sequence. But then you've also got Medusa, which is just an astonishing piece of animation.
Well, Ray Bradbury rated that as the best thing that Ray Harryhausen had ever animated.
Well, there you go. Ending on a high with that. You got the snakes in the hair moving around.
Yeah. And again, Ray did the maths on that, and he said I think there are 10 snakes in the hair, and for every single frame of film, he had to move the head and the tail of each one. Yeah. So it's not quite as bad as the 35 movements on Jason on the skeletons, but it's getting there, And then you're moving in the longer shots. You're also moving the long sort of serpent tail as well, which is Ray's own addition. That doesn't appear in when you see versions of the Gorgon or Medusa in mythology. It's usually a more human form, a more basic sort of two-legged form. So he brilliantly added this design of the sort of snaking serpent tail, which is brilliantly matched up with sort of rattlesnake-like sound effects and hissing noises and things. And the lighting in that scene is great. They're lighting that by candlelight, by flickering flame light. Mm. How do you do that when you're animating something at 24 frames a second, one by one?
Yeah, no, it's a remarkable sequence. It really is.
Yeah.
And arguably, this has got the best cast of a Ray Harryhausen?
Well, yeah, they've actually got proper actors in, real stars in this one. Well, Olivier for one, the one person who got criticism was Harry Hamlin, who the movie tried to make into a star, and he's no worse than any other block of wood sword-wielding hero, and as I say, if we get the names mixed up, if we call Jason Sinbad or whatever during this podcast, it doesn't matter, because they're all they're the same character. They're an archetype, aren't they? So he's there doing a job, and I think he's okay at what he does. He does what he's got to do. But then you're up against this stellar cast with people like Olivier in it, and you've got who else? Maggie Smith's in there, Ursula Andress, people like this, and they're all loving playing Greek gods as well. They're getting as much out of this as Harryhausen gets out of, as we said earlier, manipulating his own figures. They're loving playing Zeus and figures like this, and just being able to sort of lord it over the puny humans.
And arguably, that Harry Hamlin gets out-acted by a mechanical owl.
Yeah, Bubo, who got panned by the fans at the time because everybody said, oh, it's just a rip-off of R2-D2. And then Harryhausen came out and said, oh, no, it isn't, which didn't make matters any better, because it clearly is. But then all these years on, it's great that it's a rip-off of R2-D2. He's a lovely character.
It's fine. I think as a kid you like it. I think it's fine, but I don't think I can understand why people would be.
Yeah. But I think that's getting better over time. I think in the year the film came out, that was the major sticking point for people. Was we love the film, we love the effects, we love that sequence with the Medusa, we love the fact that there's a big name cast in it, we love the spectacle, but we hate that owl.
Yeah. And then he retired and went touring to different cinemas throughout the country over the next 15 years.
Yeah. Well, I met him 3 times, so that shows how far and wide he was getting around. And as I say, he then realised that his surviving models, some of which were 40 or 50 years old by now, were starting to rot, and the rubber and the materials that he was using was starting to sort of wear away, and he might be left with the metal armatures and things, but he liked showing off the full figures. He loved taking those round to conventions. So what he started doing was he used his spare time to actually sculpt his creations in bronze, so that there will be a Ray Harryhausen created representation of that figure that would last for all time. He obviously knew that people were interested in his legacy by that point. And I think that came out of going around and meeting the fans. I think the interest may have actually surprised him a little bit. And then having surprised him, he thought, well, I can't leave the models behind because they're all going to rot away eventually. But I need to leave something. I need to preserve my legacy. So he did it in bronze.
And I think there's a big exhibition on at the Scottish Museum of Art at the moment in Edinburgh. That's on for a year, apparently. Obviously, with the pandemic hitting, it's been a bit of a tricky one. So I'm not sure whether they're going to extend that or not. But it's apparently it's on there until September 2021.
Yeah, adding to the Harryhausen legacy, in the past few years, there have been several absolutely amazing coffee table books as well. Some of which are interviews with Ray talking about his career with like production stills and things. I think there's a book that's got all of his production art in it, including the sketches that we mentioned for things like the Elementals and some of the unfilmed material. And Ray's artwork is just stunning. You could hang them in an art gallery.
Yeah.
Brilliant pencil drawings, brilliant paintings. So if you want another fix of Harryhausen, when it's your birthday or Christmas, ask someone to buy you a Ray Harryhausen book, because they weigh a ton, I will warn you, but stick them down on your coffee table and browse through them. They're fantastic to look at.
Cool. Well, I guess that brings us to the end of our little jaunt into the history of Ray Harryhausen. Thank you again for joining us, Daryl.
Thanks, Adam.
And thank you guys for listening. We will be back again in another couple of weeks. Again, I want to thank the BFI and Quad for supporting this podcast, and we will see you again in a couple of weeks' time. Take care.